We thought the story of the day before couldn't get any worse, that it wouldn't get more weird, but then we found out about the $1,000+ fines that they leveled on volunteers who made mistakes. And that's just one of the highlights. This is made possible because of the investigative journalism of outlets like GameStar and Game Two. So we've got a glimpse behind the doors of the day before developer Fantastic. We've actually seen, well, how the game ended up being that bad, the development conditions that seem to in fact be worse. It is quite the story, and to support it and our content, here's our sponsor. You and your fellow viewers at Bellular.ghost.io. Seriously, you guys are helping us out a lot, and in return for your support over there, we've got Loading Screen, our daily newsletter that keeps you up to date on everything going on, early access to our videos, early access to our research reports. We've also set it up so there is a free trial whenever you sign up there as well, so you can have a little bit of a gander around to see what's up. It is the single best way that you can support our channel. It seriously makes a massive difference, and even just seeing you guys chat and hang out over at the Members Lounge Discord, honestly, that's just really cool. And by the way, for that, you get your invite right after you sign up. So thank you for your support, and with that said, let's go. Okay, to get into it then, the reporting from German outlet GameStar and German YouTube channel Game Two has essentially involved them collecting stories from 16 employees of the company, and then also from staff of Matona, who are the publisher of the day before. This is the kind of in-depth work that absolutely we need more of in the industry. We will have links to their content down below. We're going over like the big story here. I absolutely, though, suggest that you check out their work as well. And honestly, the picture that they paint is a fairly distressing one. Now, this is mostly following up on some accounts that came from Russian language outlets that were presented shortly after the game essentially imploded. Now, those were alleging forced overtime, crunch, and a chaotic environment that essentially was being led by their founders, this pair of brothers. Let's just get started with the initial pitch of this game. The day before originally started as something way smaller. Essentially, right, they had made this game called The Wild 8. It was a survival game in a very wintry setting. And actually, to be honest with you, does look pretty good. And what the day before was supposed to be was a lower stakes version of the sort of zombie survival genre that would have been set in a similar setting to The Wild 8. And as they say, it would have, had a few hour campaign, you could have done co-op, but it wasn't really supposed to be the biggest thing in the universe. So that was the original vision. Essentially, it was a bit closer to what they already knew they could do, and it seems like a game with a scope they could have actually delivered. But then it morphs, and it morphs into something looking a little bit more like The Division, at least having a big city level, a sort of a element to it, and then the art style changes, right? The art style changes, things get a bit more detailed, and that scope begins to creep and creep and creep, just as we saw all of those open world areas in those original trailers. And this is essentially where the problems are beginning, because unlike most AAA games that use a vertical slice of the game to do their trailer, and then they maybe have to scale back, what happened here is, well, the first trailers were an entirely different build of the game, one that would never be released. What that essentially means, right, is imagine you get all your assets together, and you get the mechanics, the mechanics working. None of it's optimized. None of it has any sort of overarching, systems that talk to each other. But with that, you can film things, and then you can cut them into a trailer so that it all looks like it's a part of one truly real video game that you can play. Unlike a situation with, say, Watch Dogs, where Watch Dogs was capable of pretty much everything that they showed at E3, but it was way scaled back. But it was still fundamentally Watch Dogs. Whereas here, it's not so much like that. So, no wonder a team of their size was able to produce something that looked so goddamn amazing and get, the most wish lists of a current game that, had wish lists in Steam. I mean, a lot of that was real, but it was never something you'd be able to play. Then what essentially happened is the CEO brothers, right? They kept on seeing things in video games. They'd be like, oh, we like that. That's successful. We'll do that. We'll do that. And that then leads to scope creep and craziness. Apparently, things like the character creator were changed at fairly short notice to match Cyberpunk, Hogwarts, and Baldur's Gate 3, respectively. Which, of course, if you think about those timelines, when the day before was originally supposed to launch and when it did launch, that's completely insane. And this is essentially a process that happened in more things than just the character creator. It essentially just happened across really all points of the game over the 5 years, including a strange pivot from the tone over to the city, whereas originally, as is said in the report from Game 2, it was supposed to be like in a kind of snowy rural setting, but no, they just go for big Division City. I mean, even looking at some of the trailers, you can see like the Lamborghini and, a character who is dressed less like the Division, less like The Last of Us, and a bit more like it's a GTA Online thing. Yeah, they were being fairly mercenary, playing big AAA games, and just trying to yoink things from them and put them into this really big soup. Of course, the problem is that's not how you scope a project that's ever going to be released, ever. One story is actually that the brothers played Spider-Man, and they wanted the city in their game to match the tone of it, and that meant that they had to rebuild the whole thing, which is pretty insane. And this is why asset developers were able to highlight specific implementations of their work in the final product, because the developers were very rapidly iterating and putting things together based on those assets. So essentially, are they modeling every building? No, they're not. They're getting them off the asset store. That's a totally normal thing, by the way, and loads of games do it. The thing is, usually, you get an asset off the asset store and then you do something with it. That was not really as possible here because of, well, the very, very rapid iteration that was going on. Seemingly, right, mid-production, and that's the problem. A lot of this testing, iteration, thinking about ideas to borrow, that's fine in pre-production, that's fine when you're prototyping stuff. It's not whenever you've got to, get your heads down and actually produce the bloody game. So let's talk about then how they treated their staff. One of the things that I think confused just about everybody was their whole volunteer thing. And they really tried to make that a core part of their company marketing. So here's what happened. Game 2 also spoke to one of Fantastic's volunteers, and they catalogued the terrible treatment that this volunteer received. The individual confirmed that they used volunteers for marketing, map editing, testing, and translating, with a volunteer responsible for recruiting and leading the volunteers. And some of those leaders were paid, but most people, right, they got game codes and they got microtransaction currency for Prop Night, which is another game that essentially they had another team working on. So yes, you pull overtime and at best, you're going to get some digital currency for Prop Night. That's kind of insane. Now, of course, this overtime would normally just mean all 7 days of the week. One staff member claimed that they would beg for time to have a shower or a meal. Now, this all seems bad, but it's actually not really the worst way that they treated staff. And this next bit is truly mad. The sources are claiming that the brothers would spontaneously fire people to encourage the remaining staff. This, of course, would be motivational in, not the best way. So that's bad and quite bad for long-term health. But then also, some claimed, and this is insane, that they were subject to fines from management where work fell below certain standards. Game 2 actually were able to collect evidence showing 2 individuals being charged $1,930 USD to compensate Fantastic for, quote, low-quality voice recordings. So, that's a pretty insane way to supplement your revenue while you're developing a game. Wow. So this is obviously completely mad. It's absolutely awful. And it's the sort of thing that can happen in certain segments of games where essentially young, passionate people can be exploited. In this case, it seems that yes, people could be exploited. And, the brothers were more than happy to do that. Now, through all of this, you're probably thinking, hang on a second, they had all these people making the game, who was giving them the money? Well, of course, the answer is Matona, who are the publisher. And this is where things get fairly interesting, again, per Game 2's sources. Matona did not fully investigate the game until just before release. And when they did, they realized, oh dear, this will need to be rebuilt from scratch, or at the very least postponed, for 2 to 3 years. Now, allegedly before that, they were fairly hands-off. They essentially took it in faith that things were going well. One could maybe imagine that with the marketing campaign being so successful and there being so much buzz around the game that, well, everybody just kind of gets caught up with it. And they did not do the due diligence that they absolutely should have done. Of course, what's weird then is that even knowing that, they did actually decide to go ahead and release the game. At this stage, I have to imagine they maybe hoped that it would have been a 6 out of 10, that they could have recouped some of their money and just moved on. But of course, it was worse than they thought, right? It was worse than they thought. Then Fantastic essentially abandoned the game. They literally had no money. And then the liabilities all fall back on Matona. Well, I say Fantastic don't have any money. There are things the founders have claimed, but, point being, they weren't getting any more money to develop this game. And yes, while it had sold loads of copies, the refund rate was absolutely insane. And then, obviously it got pulled. Anyway, the publisher was then caught holding the bag for all of this. And when that happened, number one, they had to deal with, refunds and all of that. But essentially, they went to their staff and they asked, look, do you think we can fix this game? Would you like to try and fix this game? And out of the 300 plus employees in the company, 20 said that they would be willing to try to do that post-launch. And because only 20 people said that they would be willing, the publisher then abandoned the game. So ultimately what this was a publisher not really keeping a close enough eye on something when, to be honest, it probably should have looked like it was too good to be true. You have the leaders of this company essentially selling a lot of people down the river and not really knowing how to actually manage a larger game project, as evidenced by the amount of changes and seemingly a degree of megalomaniacal management of their company. The people who got hurt here primarily, there's going to be the publisher in terms of their financials, and of course, most prominently, it will be the staff. Now, to a degree, customers also have been hurt, but because refunds were actually a thing that everybody was able to get, I think nobody's actually out of pocket because of this. But certainly if you put time and energy into it, you're going to feel like you're pretty hard done by the whole endeavor. So with that in mind, we can now discuss the response from Fantastic. So what happened is that one day after the servers went online, Fantastic made a post, right? Now, this is a bit weird because they made this statement and then they deleted it after on Twitter they got a community note. Then it was reposted, then they got another community note, then they deleted it, and then they tried a third time, and they limited responses to only people who they followed and verified accounts, but then they deleted it after 5 minutes. This happened over the course of 24 hours, and it essentially seems like they would post the thing and then quickly notice that their, attempt to manifest a new reality where their statement is actually the truth. It just seems that those attempts failed, and then they just tried to, do it again, but tweak the parameters a little. It's very bizarre, but what we can do now is actually go through the points that they made one by one. So the first thing is that anonymous people are alleging that they deceived players, and what they essentially get at in this point is that they didn't do a Kickstarter, they didn't take, money from anybody. There were no pre-orders or anything like that. And that because they have existed since 2015, they're not some sort of fly-by-night company. All of this stuff is technically true. And in a strictly monetary sense, they didn't take pre-orders. They didn't take a Kickstarter. Whenever people refunded the game, they did get their refunds. But of course, that's not really what most people were talking about. The point here is less that it was an outright scam in players, more that it was just a really bad game. Right? It was a really bad game that was not as good as they sort of led players to believe based on their communications and based on their marketing. So even if it wasn't very literally intentionally a scam, the whole thing ended up being so much of a shit show that to just about everybody involved, I think it rightly will have felt like a scam because at the end of the day, they did ask money, and what they asked money for did not match what, their marketing would have led somebody to believe. Let's move on then. So anonymous people allege they deceived their investor. So they're claiming to have had a great relationship with their publishing partner, and that's kind of the sort of thing that we can't really refute without Batona stepping in. Now, they do say that they still have a joint venture with their publisher, and per the New Zealand corporate registry, that is actually true. Though going into Game 2's documentary, I very much don't think Batona are going to be happy with them. So they still have, I suppose, that going on, but as for Matona, they've been left holding the bag. It seems like Matona would be right to feel decently deceived, even though part of that blame falls on them for not having enough due diligence and actually looking into this project. To move on to their next point then, anonymous former employees tell different stories about development. So, if you want to discredit the accusations of former employees, you would probably start with some reasonable points, wouldn't you? Well, here, what they do in their post is they run through the many benefits that they claim to have offered staff, including helping with somebody's mortgage, and they present Fantastic as a hard-working team of very happy staff. staff. So that's what they said. Now, in terms of the employee allegations they're responding to, it is likely the accounts of unnamed ones. Some people made posts. There's a few examples of those, such as one where a former staffer claimed that they had to deal with layoffs, constant repetition of work, and that leadership were, quote, always looking for scapegoats, or another one that came out where basically staff claimed that the game was never like an MMO-style game. So there's all of this stuff coming from staff. So obviously what they're saying is like technically hearsay, but at the end of the day, you've got loads of people alleging fairly similar things. A lot of this has been backed up by the investigative journalism of the German outlets that we discussed at the top of this video, which just makes me think that that is, an attempt at damage control that's likely partially dishonest. But, I will say allegedly so that we are safe. To move on then, who made money on the day before? That's something I want to talk about. They say that certain bloggers made huge money by creating false content with huge titles from the very beginning to gain viewers and followers, exploiting the lack of information on the game's development, and that their actions triggered a gold rush among content creators due to the game's pre-release popularity. So with that, you certainly do think, this is not necessarily in good faith, is it? Okay. Did people make articles on this game, and did they make money from that? Yes. Did content creators discuss this game, and did they make money from that? Yes. Now, whether this game was good or bad, that is something that would have happened. If this was a good game that did live up to its expectations, then the sort of overall media would have made money from that and likely would have communicated to people that there's something worth playing there. Or perhaps you get a situation like with Palworld, where, aspects of the media are kind of looking into it because it's certainly a game that has a few quirks. Its development process has a few quirks as well. There's been interesting interviews with, with their co-founder. So there's all of that. Some of that would be positive news, some of that would be negative news, but in addition, what do you see? Well, every news outlet is pumping out the guides because at the end of the day, they're trying to make money off what's going on. So, the media is going to be the media. Ultimately, if people were wrong about this game, right, it would have played out differently. I think about the videos that say Force, released, where he was looking into this game, trying to work out what the hell was going on, and was kind of flagging to his audience, hey, I think there's something bad going on here. I don't think this is going to be a real game. Warning sign. And did he make money from that? Absolutely. But his job is to make content for his audience, whether it's good or bad. It's a fairly reasonable thing to do. And ultimately, given, say, the ongoing legal troubles, the delays, the partnership videos with Nvidia, those things are all newsworthy stories that should be covered, and they should be covered because this is the most wish-listed game on Steam. And that does mean that it is, I think, quite valid as a public interest story. If you end up being the most wish-listed game on Steam, you shouldn't be angry that people then want to do some due diligence on you, that they want to work out what's going on, because our audiences, given that this is the most wish-listed game, have significant exposure to it. Generally, we do exist to serve our audience. So that's what's going on, and really I think this is where it becomes quite clear that they're kind of just living in their own little conspiracy fantasy where everybody just ganged up against them. And it's like, is that true? In a way, yes, everybody covered what was going on with the game, and that was broadly against them, but it's not because we all colluded to do that, it's because we looked at the game and reported the state of it. So yeah, that's sheer delusion. Let's keep on going then. Why do they say that the release game is not the same as that in the trailers, and why was the game closed? They say, we implemented everything shown in the trailers, from home improvements and a detailed world to off-road vehicles. We only disabled a few minor features like parkour due to bugs, but plan to include them in full release. Now, this is simply not true. This isn't right. Think about some of the things in the trailers. The mud deformation around the vehicles that sort of would remind you of splint tires, that's not there. There's the whole, world that actually had big hordes of zombies. Now, the thing here is, we know about this because they made a whole video about it using trailers that they had deleted from their own channel. That's the thing that's crazy. They deleted things on their channel. They're essentially arguing then that the negative influence before the launch impacted people's perceptions, that instead, quote, unbiased gameplay like Dr. Disrespect stream showed a game people liked, but unfortunately the hate campaign had already caused too much damage. And then they go on to a truly bizarre ending where they essentially snipe out their critics by suggesting, quote, many people wrote to us that bloggers had deceived them, and they liked the game and they asked for access, and that the fact the codes were going for $200 showed interest. lost. Now, ultimately, while fantastic are the people who closed the game and its servers, nobody else did. They could have tried to weather that storm if they did think that they had a very diehard fan base that actually really did like the game. If they thought that that's something that they could actually bet on, they probably wouldn't have shut the thing down 4 days after launch. So really, I mean, what I can say from our perspective is we have tried to be fair and honest. I haven't went and outright said that it's a scam. I have been very clear in saying that, yeah, they're not taking pre-orders. We're reporting on things like them deleting their trailers, on fishy things that are weird and confusing, on what is a absolutely journalistically, relevant topic, given that there is a legitimate public interest in this, since it's the most wishlisted game on Steam. So this is a completely absurd letter. When people talk about reality distortion fields in, say, relation to a Steve Jobs, some of that is supposed to be this thing of, the impossible seems possible. But that's, people sort of try to mean that in some way that's quite, positive. We can overcome any challenge. In this case, this is a reality distortion field that they're trying to create that's essentially saying, didn't do nothing. It's fine. We didn't do nothing bad. It's all these damn people against us. So, I can certainly empathize with somebody feeling a bit paranoid when, it does seem like the whole internet's out to get them. But at the end of the day, it's sort of because of their own actions. And, now we're having ex-employees leaking to the press, talking about what's up with the game's development. So, no, I think they firmly have themselves to blame for this one. So ultimately, that is the situation. Now, I highly recommend that you check out, what's going on from GameStar and Game Two. I really, really enjoyed their video. It was very, very well made. So yeah, that'll be linked down below. I think with this, though, we can finally put the day before to bed. That's it. The story's finished. Let me know then what you think. Do you think that it could have been salvaged in some way? And of course, I'll see you in the next video. We're pretty much doing them daily now. Have a great day. I'll see you there.